there's a wonderful phrase called French extension. Now, the French extension is about creating a role within your organisation which has got the same duties, has got the same responsibilities, conditions, location, that's moot, but nonetheless, location suggested. If you want to employ people on the minimum wage doing a job, you need to have employed somebody on a permanent basis on a minimum wage doing that job as well. Now, I've read that the law says that it does not necessarily require you to have that person, the comparator, that's the phrase we were talking about earlier, the comparator on site. But best practice, I would suggest, is that if we are looking to recruit people on a minimum wage or lower than our standard permanent member of staff's hourly rates, that we actually have somebody employed doing that job. Now, if that person was to leave, well then, of course, you have to show evidence that you're trying to recruit to replace that role. So if that vacancy were actually empty, you could still nonetheless evidence to a tribunal that you've had somebody carrying out that role historically, and that was the pay rate and so forth. But ideally on site is very, very important. So that's French extension. The other phrase you may have heard of is Swedish derogation. I'd love to see what they're going to come up with for people in Brussels or Luxembourg, but Swedish derogation. This is where the agency takes on the member of staff themselves as a paid employee and guarantees them work, ostensibly with the client organisation. But of course, the danger from the agency, from the introducer's point of view, is what? If the booking finishes, you still have to keep paying. Now, I've seen some temp documentation recently which would suggest that the employers would prefer the introducing agency to actually take the staff on and guarantee them work, because then you're not required to pay the same rate as somebody that's doing the job at the moment. That's great from the employer's point of view, but it does leave the agency very, very exposed. And I know that a lot of agency owners that I talk to are not going to go near this with a barge pole because it creates so many potential problems for them. Now, if you're running a driving agency, perhaps, and you've got drivers out on a continual basis and you've got some chap or lady that's been working with you for 2-3 years continuously, that may be an option. It doesn't necessarily mean you take on every single driver onto your books on a permanent basis. Maybe you take on your 5-star guys and girls because they're always in demand, and in fact you could replicate them over and over again. That might work for you. But if you're talking about generic office, production, manufacturing, warehouse staff, that's probably dangerous. Because if the assignment finishes, then they come back onto your books and you have got to do two things. Number one, you've got to keep paying them for a period of time. I forget how long it is. It might be 13 weeks. I don't know if you know that off the top of your head. Put it on the spot. Doesn't matter. Okay. You weren't listening. Okay. But also it does mean that you've got to evidence very, very clearly exactly what you're doing to try and find that person alternative work. And that's going to tie some people up. So Swedish derogation, I would suggest, is potentially quite dangerous for generic agencies to be involved in. But it might work for certain specialists. Guy, it might work for you if you've got a couple of people that are contract in the accountancy sector. He's shaking his head, don't want to go down that route. That's the vibe that we're getting from most of the people. When we start talking through the REC and APSCO, most people don't want to get involved in Swedish derogation. Now there's another area, which is harmonisation. Well, let me suggest that the word is actually spurious, because harmonisation suggests that actually all your permanent members of staff have their salaries reduced to that of the temporary worker. and we've got a chuckle from the room. I mean, can you imagine that's going to create a mass walkout, civil war? And anyway, I think that could be argued to be constructive dismissal in certain occasions. But, you know, harmonisation, whereupon we say, you know what, we're going to pull everybody down and we're going to give them minimum wage or just above. I can't see that that's going to work. Certainly not around here, when, despite the fact that we are at the end of the recession, you know, we've got a lack of talent. Whether it be somebody working in production, a driver, an accountant, paralegal, we've got a lack of quality candidates. Lots of people available, but not the right people for the right jobs. So for us to suggest that we actually pull our permanent members of staff down their basic salaries, I can't see it's going to work. Now, another way round this could be the managed service provider. But when we start looking at the managed service provider, the real issue is a temporary worker genuinely under the control of the introducing agency? By which we mean that they are not given any direction whatsoever by the employer. So if we have people out working with a client, let's say working in a warehouse, we would need to have a supervisor employed by Orchard Recruitment Heroes actually on site whenever there's somebody available, whenever there's somebody doing that job, and that person would report into them on a minute-by-minute basis. Now, of course, certain companies do outsource whole functions. You think about people that are involved in, let's say, dress manufacturing. They may outsource completely the distribution. So they have somebody on site that deals with goods in, goods out, and actually the people that run the manufacturing business have no engagement with those people whatsoever. But for the most part, that isn't the case. For the most part, agencies and introducers provide staff on a contract for service or a contract of employment basis, whereupon actually the employer has somebody that supervises the temp workforce. Excuse me. If that's the case, the managed service provider does not cover that. And again, I think the tribunals will be very, very sharp to look at this for a very early stage. So that would clearly be the exception rather than the rule. As I said earlier, it also means that if you're a master vendor or if you're a neutral vendor, DePaul is a name that comes to mind that we all love so dearly, they are also bound by this legislation. It covers them as well.